Hello, everyone. Editing Danny here. So much like with the big IndyCar month of May recap episode that dropped, well, almost a month ago now, we are doing a similar thing with marquee endurance races with Le Mans and Nürburgring in that order, particularly. So, because much like how Sansu, I didn't really feel like there was enough for that to stand on its own as an episode. Because the 24 Hours of Nürburgring was so heavily weather delayed and then canceled early, there was hardly any racing, and I just did not feel like we had enough to ship that as its own episode. So I am choosing to tack it on of the end of the Le Mans recap. So just a bit of an FYI before we dive into the episode. Thank you very much, and back to your normally scheduled programming. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Chicanery. We are your hosts. I'm Danny, and of course, we have JT.
Hello again.
And so it's Le Mans. Uh, it's the most, well, at least it's probably my favorite endurance race of the year. I will resist the
Most
urge to.
wonderful time of the year.
Yeah, I was gonna resist the urge to make that joke. Lord knows I don't need somebody to bite my head off for Christmas references in June, but at any rate, it's certainly my favorite. And this year was well, it was all very eventful. I mean, 24-hour races are generally rather eventful, but well, Mother Nature made her presence known at this race, but before. I mean, we've got qualifying and practice, we've got BOP, and we've got some other kind of off the track stuff to get through first. So, probably without any further ado, we should get to it. And I guess to start off first is that extracurricular sporting activities and racing drivers really have not seemed to mix these last couple years. Uh, because Jose Maria Lopez injured himself um, in a cycling incident, which stop me if you've heard that one before. So he ended up being replaced by Mike Conway in the number 7 Toyota hypercar afterward, and then Jack Hawksworth filled in. Or sorry, I got that completely wrong. Conway hurt himself. Jose Maria Lopez took over. Hawksworth was filling in for Lopez in the Lexus GT3. That's the order that happened in. Sorry, um, but yes, as a note to all cyclists, or I guess racers, come cyclists, stop it. Do not do this before starts of seasons or marquee events because you
Just
will
buy a
hurt yourself.
Peloton. Like, oh my god. Like, I don't understand why you can't just buy a stationary bike. Like, they even have settings where it's like it has a screen and then it gives you like the simulation where it feels like you're actually cycling in those like mountainous areas and shit like that. So it's like, that should be enough.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, it's funny. Tony Kanon is very active on Zwift. which is the cycling, basically cycling software. Because my ex, who's a very avid cyclist, used to actually cycle with him on Zwift all the time, particularly during COVID. Um, but um, but yes, it's very silly, and stop doing it, please. Um, but at any rate, moving on, I guess it's kind of an update to a bit of reporting that we did earlier in the year. It is looking increasing like Yoda is going to take over Cadillac's operations in WEC, um, which is which will be cool. Yoda's seen some success with the Porsche, even winning around recently. So it seems like if anybody's going to do it, they're probably the one to do it. I assume this means that they will be leaving Porsche as a direct result of this. But yes, and I guess kind of to piggyback off of that, the FIA and ACO have confirmed that hypercar teams will be ostensibly forced to run 2 entries next year. They had been, it wasn't officially set in stone, but it was pretty well as good as done that that was going to be the case. And well, it's been made official. I still feel like that is the absolute incorrect thing to do. But what do I know? Um, but the 2025 WEC schedule was released. Um, so it's pretty much the schedule that we all kind of know and love already. You've got the 1812, 6 hours of Imola, 6 hours of Spa, Le Mans, Sao Paulo, Coda, Fuji, and Bahrain, with, of course, Prologue as preseason testing. And there was a thing today, um, which was basically this is gonna the schedule that we're gonna have basically for the next couple years. We're not gonna see an additional round on the calendar until something like 2027, which is a decision. It was a decision that was made. But again, I am not the FIA, so clearly I do not know what I'm talking about.
I mean, yeah,
um,
it sucks. Like again, like we were talking about this like before we hit record, obviously, but it would suffice. Like I wouldn't have an issue with having like just 8 rounds of WEC races for the next 2 to 3 years. If they added more tracks into like the schedule rotation, like if you added like I don't know, throw in a round or two like at Spa or like Spa's already on there, but Silverstone or Hockenheim, like I think it's funny how they don't have any like races in like the UK or Germany or something like that, or like Kailami, like that could work since F1 doesn't race there. Nobody's using that track right now, or no major like huge conglomerate racing series are currently using that track now. So why not? I would be fine with that. But the same license for the next 2 to 3 years is kind of annoying. I mean, it kind of feels like they're moving like IndyCar, unfortunately.
yeah, I completely agree. And actually, it's funny that you brought up, and we were, alluded to, we were talking about this a little bit off air. But I do think it's interesting you bring up Kailami because yeah, I think some regional series in South Africa run there, but not much else. But Porsche owns the circuit, and the circuit is in fabulous condition. The circuit was resurfaced a year or two ago, so be a fabulous place to host a race.
I mean, I think the last time like a big racing series actually raced there was like last year with was like GT Intercontinental or something like that. I think they raced there, which they don't this year they aren't racing there anymore, which I mean part of the reason was because they were struggling to get a lot of like entries. Like they couldn't get a lot of teams to actually show up at the race. So that's why they stopped going. But it could work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't see why it couldn't work at all. Yeah, there's no real reason why not. Um, but whatever. But yes, no, having the schedule basically be frozen like this for the next 2 years is just it's just awful. Um, I don't see any real reason why this has to be the case. The only reason I feel like this is probably more out of necessity than anything else. And I know, yeah, the FIA is the FIA. I know they'll posit and sort of postulate like, oh, yes, well, this is a part of, grand master plan. But I feel like this is just because they borked something and, I don't know if discussions with maybe hosting an additional round have stalled out and this is the fastest that they can do it. That's kind of what this feels to me, and this feels very well poorly organized. You alluded to IndyCar, and much like the way they tend to botch these things quite regularly, that's kind of what this feels like to me.
I mean,
But
yeah. And then earlier we were talking about how they were mandating the two cars for next season, at least in hypercar, which is like, I mean, obviously I don't agree with that. Um, I don't personally like it, but I mean, I kind of understand because I remember like after Le Mans was over, I was talking to some people like in a space, and that was brought up, and somebody had mentioned that part of it is probably because like you don't really gain much from running just one car in WEC, or like it makes it harder for yourself at least, or it makes it harder for teams. Something like Cadillac, for example, they only have one entry currently, which I mean, you know, part of that has to do with less of like Cadillac and more, I think, Chip Ganassi, and they're like kind of stretched thin and they can only really, that's all they can manage. But they are kind of at a disadvantage because it makes it harder to gain points in the championship because I mean you only have one car, and if that one car that you have doesn't do well in races, or a couple of races, God forbid, then you are automatically at a disadvantage. So at least like you know and it's also because I mean they're the only team, or the only like I guess like factory outfit that does have one car. Meanwhile, they're competing against other like factory outfits and even privateer teams that have two entries. So it's like you already have to compete with other people who have more resources and entries than you. So like it makes it harder. So I do understand it from like that standpoint. However, it's definitely still gonna like hurt smaller teams like Asada Fraschini. Like I don't know um, how well they would fare with having to do two cars.
yeah, and that was kind of what I was thinking. It was just, it's the little guys that are arguably going to suffer most. I mean, crack out my tiniest violin for, like Lamborghini or whatever. Like, okay, whatever. You guys will figure it out. Ditto Cadillac. But yeah, it's the Asada Fraschini, which had kind of a tough time hauling themselves on the grid in the first place. Where now you're gonna ask them to operate two cars, like that's not gonna go well. But I mean, hey ho, it is what it is, and I mean, ultimately, yeah, I kind of understand the rationale is because it will rationalize the field a little bit and points opportunities, but yeah, it's just some, question decision making rather that I find a bit questionable at times, and it makes me wonder about sort of broader long-term viability, quite frankly. But at any rate, moving on. It is well, arguably, well, definitely my favorite subheading title. It's a BOP breakdown. Because I find that very entertaining to look at, and the subheading "Bop It" is, I just think, wonderfully creative. Um, but yeah, having a bit of looky loo. Interestingly enough, didn't see a ton of like weight adjustment or what have you for hypercars. It looks like there was a little bit of adjustment on power mainly. It looked like the Ferrari got nerfed a little bit. Uh, Lamborghini did too, which is odd. The Toyota got a little bit of a bump. The Alpine got a bit of a bump. The BMW did. The Cadillac stayed put. The Asada Fraschini effectively did too. And the Peugeot got a minor nick off, but not enough, I think, to make a massive difference. Um, but But yeah, so that's kind of the breakdown. And as for GT3, uh, everybody got a weight increase, which that doesn't make sense. It's like if everybody gets a weight increase, then does anybody actually get a weight increase? It's like that line from The Incredibles: "If everybody is super, then no one is." But at any rate,
Hamilton only got like 1 kilo. Like I think Porsche got 1 kilo, Corvette got two, and then like I think the Corvette, Ferrari, and Porsche all got a 1% power increase. It's like at that point, what difference does it make? But I guess
uh,
I don't know. Every kilogram matters.
I mean, yeah, I guess there is that line of thinking, but it seems so minimal. Um, I mean, now the Lambo got actually a pretty massive hit in the face with a weight increase. It was like 25 kilos, which is up from the 1330 kilos that it was at Spa, which was quite a sizable increase, if I remember correctly. Um, and also lost a bit of power because now power is something like 15% below, the theoretical maximum. And Aston Martin was next on the list with 22 kilos, which to be fair, that makes a bit more sense because the Aston Martins have been kind of cooking these last few rounds. So, but uh, but as for everybody else, it basically just didn't make a difference hardly at all. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Take these adjustments for whatever you think they were, but they were all broadly speaking pretty nominal. Um, Now, moving on into practice and quali, the 311 Cadillac, which is the Wayland, the Act Express racing car, was not fast. It was actually, in fact, the only Cadillac to not make hyperpole. Um, and the Peugeots were also very slow as well. Both cars missed hyperpole. Uh, Otherwise, broadly speaking, the field was pretty well condensed. So I guess call it a rare W for BOP. Um, The number 20, BMW missed out on hyperpole, but Dries Vantour was able to get the number 15 to the top of the timesheets to advance. Um, the number 7 Toyota would go for a spin at the end of the session, which would actually end the session early, and Kamui subsequently had all of his laps yeeted into the abyss. Which seemed a bit harsh, but fair enough. Um, and the number 6 Porsche Penske just barely made it through, but that was largely because the session was ended early, so that was more a function of a session as opposed to, I think, outright pace. And the number 12 Hertz Toyota Porsche made it to hyperpole as a result of the number 7 Toyota being effectively thrown out of the session, which was funny. So they got a little bit of a freebie, but arguably did not make it on merit. Um, Night practice would not go well for the number 12, however, because it crashed in the in the S's, and there was significant damage to the car. It was a backup chassis, and basically the team had to scramble to get the car built from scratch, which is a process that usually takes 3 weeks. They did it in 24 hours, which is that has shades of early 2000s Audi LMP when they were able to get that car rebuilt in what was like record time. Um, and it's funny, the car was, successfully rebuilt, and then the shakedown was done on a nearby airfield, which like that feels like so post-war racing when they, literally used to run and do these things on, basically what were at that point disused airfields. So to get the car done and then do the shake by on an airfield, like that's just cool. And as such, arguably the number 12 was kind of they were the victors in my heart, if not actually. But at any rate,
I mean, it's cool up until the fact that the surface is pretty like rough, like it's very bumpy, and it's like don't mess up the car after
yeah,
you just rebuilt it because you
yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, because I mean, it is not 1957. So yes, as a result, a lot of those surfaces, those airfields, yeah, they're pretty bumpy now because just as Mother Nature does her thing. Um, but at any rate, moving on to Hyperpole, uh, it would end up being delayed because repairs needed to be done to the Armco after a big accident in the Le Mans Cup race. It's wild that they still use. I mean, I understand that that area is a public road any other time in the year, but I still think it's wild that they're using Armco and not something a bit more modern. But that's a discussion entirely. Um, and it was all right until the number 15 bend it on the outlap, which wake me up if you heard that before. Um, and then the lap times were deleted because it caused the red flag during a session, only to add insult to injury. Um, then this all in all made the session a lot much more frantic and chaotic because session was red flagged with like 7 and a bit minutes left. Um, the number 3 Cadillac was leading the session when it was red flagged, and the Cadillac team thought they had it in the bag, but the session was resumed, and the number 6 of Kevin Estra and the number 2 of Alex Lynn, they basically fought it out for pole. And the number 6, Porsche Penske, would end up on pole for the race. He got a bit of a tow from one of the LMP2 cars, which, well, especially at a place like Le Mans with lots of big straights, a little tow helps a lot. Um, and the AO Racing LMP2 was on pole, and it was in kind of an odd twist. I certainly didn't see this coming. It was the Inception McLaren that put it on pole in LMGT3. The McLarens have been absolutely miserable things so far this year. So to see one on pole is kind of neat. Um, um, then you moving on to actual race day proper. We were off to a blinding start. The number 7 Toyota, which was, of course, if you remember, was embroiled in that incident during the qualifying sessions, would rear end a Lexus. So a bit of Toyota on Toyota violence going on there, which resulted in significant damage to the front end of the car, perhaps unsurprisingly. It's a prototype rear ending a GT. That's kind of what happens. Um, um, the 78, because this was it's worth noting, the Lexus that showed up, it was the Otis cars, is not our favorite wonderful Vassar Sullivan machines that were there. So the 78 got some time added to their pit stop as a penalty, which, okay, fine. Number 15 BMW, again, goes for a bit of a spin. We made a jokes about the prototype BMWs always seeming to be at the scene of the crime, and well, it was no different for Le Mans, really. The Proton Porsche, this is number 99, had some door issues early on in the race. Also a familiar tale. Um, then the number 50 Ferrari, which is one of the factory cars, was penalized for unsafe release. And then the United Autosports LMP2 with Ben Keating ended up stranded in the gravel, which was pardon me, was kind of an uncharacteristic mistake. Ben has driven for all manner of factory programs. He drove for Dodge's factory program with the Viper. He drove for Corvette for a bit. So, yeah, just an odd mistake from him, but it happens. And then it started raining. And now, I don't know about you, but I always get very excited when it starts raining at Le Mans because it can get very silly very quickly. Um,
I mean, I probably
eh,
would have seen what happened last time with everybody being caught off guard by the rain and they were out on slicks and they were just like sliding around the circuit and stuff, which was like
it,
very like comedic and cartoonish.
yeah, which is fair. Yeah, my brain always throws it back to what was it? was it 2016, 2017, where it was in the middle of the night. It was just a deluge
Are you
of
talking about when like the person driving the Audi safety car like drifted?
yes, it was just sliding the car around. I can't remember who was behind the wheel that year. It
It
might have
was
been Alec.
Yannick Dalmas or something, I think.
Okay, was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was just as that means they were basically citing laps because I seem to think that the race had been red flagged at that point. And yeah, just throwing the car around a corner exit in the rain. It was so fun. Which also that's a bit of foreshadowing. But but yes, so of course, much like we were just talking about, you've got there's always the decision because Le Mans is a big circuit. Do you stay on slicks? Do you switch to wets? Because it might be raining on some parts of the circuit, it may not on other parts. And as it would happen, staying on slicks was the better option because Toyota, Alpine, Porsche had all opted for wets, and it just didn't work. Um, but yes, the chaos definitely did start um, because the number 54 and LMGT3 would end up in the tire barriers and would donf as a result. The number 50 hypercar uh, would have some issues with its rearview mirror, which is kind of funny. You don't hear about that one very often because the camera rearview mirrors have been a thing for like 15 years now. But
It was like
whatever.
the thing, like it was an actual, like the actual rearview mirror. It was
Mhm.
like hanging off, like it was funny.
Yeah, oh,
Like
yes.
it had like come loose and was just like hang in front of like the driver, and it's like that would annoy me honestly.
Yeah, it probably would, especially with the reflections and stuff. But BMW would continue to have issues. The number 20 would end up in the tire barriers and would limp back off to the pits to get repaired. The number 3 Cadillac had a bit of an off. The number 63 had an off at the Dunlop chicane. Oh, Alpine. Alpine, Alpine, Alpine. You're a meme in Formula One right now between your appallingly slow car and then your absolutely atrocious interteam dynamics at the moment. And you're a meme in WEC as well. Because the number 35 would have a rather spectacular engine failure. Um, which was very funny. Um, but yeah, it's like, okay, guys, come on. And also, ironically enough, Bruno Famine was actually, I think he was present behind the pit wall for the WEC team as well, if I remember correctly. So I don't know what that means. Maybe Bruno Famine's the problem. I don't know. Fire him. I would like to see the
The
revolving
problem
door
is
help.
the mecha chrome engines.
Yes, it really is. Like I said, it's still so funny that Mecha Chrome is a thing that still exists in 2024 because that was somewhat derisive in F1, 20 years ago when the Renault engines were badged Mecha Chrome. It was because Renault had left. And so they were basically customer engines that were old and slow and unreliable. But now Mecha Chrome is, of course, the factory engine designation, and they're new and slow and unreliable. So take that for what it's worth. Um, but moving on, the Iron Dames Lambo got assaulted by a Porsche prototype. It was Matthew Gemini behind the wheel of this one, and just like I understand wanting to get around the slower moving traffic, but like that's not really an overtaking place at the best of times. And then you just sent it in a place where there just was not space. I don't know.
I mean, it's the second time a Porsche Penske driver has taken out a female driver in a GT car. It's funny
Yes,
how this happened twice.
yes, I was just about to say if I had a nickel for every time this happened, I'd only have 2 nickels, but it's really weird, and in this case, extraordinarily annoying that it's happened twice. Because I was watching Le Mans at my friend's house on Saturday, and when that happened, I was practically screaming at the TV. But but the number 4 Porsche was given a stop-go penalty, unlike what IMSA did with Makovecki at Sebring. And the funny thing was that the number panel fell off too. In fact, it took me a while to figure out who exactly it was because the number panel was gone. Um, but then the number 36 Alpine also got mechachromed. It would end up being in the garage for a considerable amount of time before being retired. And then the Mustang found a new part to break. The rear end didn't explode, the steering rack did, which is amusing. But the Circuit de la Sarthe is bumpy and the curbs are awful, so it's easy to see how something like that can happen. Uh, then it started raining again. Um, Ferrari got cute with it and decided to try and split strategies. Um, some cars were on wet, some were on split or on slicks rather. Even at the time and even looking back over it, it is unclear to me exactly who was where and did what. But yeah, I interpreted that as trying to split the strategy. Um, the Inception McLaren reminded us that even despite it being on pole for LMGT3, that it is indeed a McLaren, and something was going to go wrong and break. And versus a small part failing and just putting them several laps back, it just decided to get it all out of the way like immediately and blew up. Um, I feel so bad. For me, granted, I don't love these cars as much as I do, the Corvettes, obviously. But I do genuinely like the McLarens, and it's frustrating to watch them break basically every round. They just fail. Um, the number 20 BMW would end up spending a significant amount of time in the garage due to a steering issue. And in fact, this so much. I couldn't tell you how long it is, but at least according to my wonderful co-host who wrote the notes for that, something like 17 hours, which is a lot. That's basically the whole race being spent in the garage with a steering issue. Which I don't know if it was because I know some of those cars have power assisted steering. So was it like an issue with the servo, an electrical issue? I don't know. But that seems like a lot of time to spend with steering issues. Um, pardon me. But at any rate, it would get messier. The number 83 Ferrari, which I can't remember the 83 because that's the yellow one. I can't remember if that is the factory Ferrari or if that was
It's
the
the
run.
privateer one.
Yes, I was just about to ask her if that was basically the American Ferrari because that's what it was. Um, but yeah, it would tangle with the number 15 BMW, and there was lots of chatter as for who was at fault. I apportioned the blame entirely because it was, I think, was it Kubica that was in the car during that?
Yes.
Yeah, I had apportioned that entirely to him. Because it was Dries Venter in the BMW, and I think it was the Manthey Porsche that they both, him and the 83 Kubica and the 83 Ferrari were overtaking. But
Yeah.
Kubica, yeah, Kubica just moved over on Dries. Like there was absolutely space to make it 3 wide and just chop the nose off of the BMW. Like that is just such clumsy driving and clumsy racecraft. And it's like I'm gonna, I don't know what the subsection of Kubica fans / apologists are amongst the listening base, but it's tough to reconcile, well, frankly, dumb stuff like this with the fact that he was at one point considered one of the best drivers in the world. Because that's amateur hour type driving, honestly. To be fair, Dries was mostly okay. Apparently, he was evaluated and did have a minor concussion, which is never great. And it's also, this is what I was thinking of when I was talking about why on earth are we still using Armco?
Yeah, because there were Armcos where the BMW hit. I don't know if it was probably the best idea. I mean, honestly, it would help because then they had to spend like at least I don't know, probably longer than an hour, but they had to repair the Armcos, bring out all the like heavy equipment and like do all the like freaking little things where it's like the sparks and stuff. Like they had to just basically repair the Armcos, which I'm like, that took a significant amount of time. It's like if you had safer barriers, this wouldn't take so long. And also you probably wouldn't have people getting concussions either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it was like an hour and 15 minutes. Because my friend, we were making dinner while we were waiting. So I mean, we had done some prep the day before, but in the time that it took to basically get food prepped, and I'm going periodically to check, still under safety car because they were fixing the barriers. It was like an hour and a half under safety car while they fixed that, which is absurd. But but the number 83 Ferrari did get penalized after we went back green. It was a 30-second stop and go for this incident. And also, Fido ended up on the circuit somehow during the safety car period, which I don't think, certainly in all the years I've been watching Le Mans, I don't think that's ever happened. Um, but but yeah, that was interesting. But Fido was okay. Um,
I mean, I don't know what happened to the dog because I never heard anything. I just saw it on the circuit, and then I'm like, nobody said
yeah,
anything else. I'm like, oh, I hope the dog didn't get like hit or anything. But I feel like you wouldn't know if the dog got hit because I'm pretty sure it'd be like there would be damage to the car if somebody hit it, honestly. But
yeah, I hadn't heard anything, so I am choosing to believe that Fido is okay. Um, but yes, but as we alluded to, the safety car period was lengthy, so that it started raining um during the period, and it looked like it was going to end up being, well, actually a rather messy safety car period. As the rain, it was raining hard towards particularly the merging period behind the safety car. Um, but everybody pitted basically once it went green to get on the appropriate tires, and it was fine. Yeah, but the five Porsche Penske and the Wayland, the Action Express Cadillac, decided to not pit for wets and stay out on slicks, which, given how hard it was raining, was a choice. Um, then the number 46 BMW retired after having a pretty massive off near the Dunlop Bridge gantry thingy, which resulted in significant damage to the car. Um, then you had the number 24 LMP2 and the number 77 Mustang, which there was some contact, and the number 24 LMP2 was penalized for it. So just LMP2 things. Um, but it started raining again, which was a common theme for this. And this, much like in 2016, 2017, this brought the race basically to a grinding halt at, somewhere between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. It really was kind of a repeat of that. Um, it was raining very hard. And of course, it's very dark because there are large parts of the Mulsanne Strait that there's just no lights other than your headlights, which is insane to think that a circuit in 2024. And again, I understand that it's basically everybody's favorite street circuit, Le Mans, and as a result, there are some limitations just due to the infrastructure, local infrastructure. I get that, but point being is that it's not, it wasn't deemed safe. But it was a very, very long safety car period to basically wait until daybreak so visibility would improve. Um, but the drivers were having a very not good time as a result of that. So much so that, there was some radio messages about struggling to basically stay awake. Um, and it's funny, it was racing so hard that rain was leaking into the cockpit of a Lambo and one of the Cadillacs, which is like, good Lord. I can only imagine how miserable it must be to have a Nomex fire suit get wet. That sounds awful, you know. Um, but
It probably is if you're like also sweating too. It's probably disgusting.
yeah, that sounds atrocious. um, yeah, so after 4 hours, so basically shortly after daybreak at local time, the safety car period finally ended. Um,
I remember I was like, oh my god, if this ends up like Nurburgring, where it's like, oh, the whole rest of the night was like no more racing, and then like daytime happens, like, oh, it's still not like okay, the conditions still aren't good to race, and then it's like, oh, we're just gonna end the race early. I was about to be so upset. But I mean, luckily that didn't happen. But I mean, it was like super like late at night when they were still under safety car. Like it was like 1 a.m. about to like go on actually like 2 a.m. and they were still under safety car that still said stage 1 out of freaking 4 like intervention. It's like, yeah, we're doing a lot of intervention, all right. So I'm just like, I turned it off and went the fuck to sleep.
yeah, it was rough. I had checked in on the race a little bit because I usually do the full 24 hour just because I had other things to do and I had a work event the night previous and didn't get enough sleep. I couldn't do it this year, but I did check up on the race in the middle of, I guess middle of the night. And I was like, Jesus Christ. And I'm looking at Twitter and everybody, the folks who did do the full, stay up late thing, we're like, it's still under safety car. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going back to bed then. But yeah, it finally ended basically shortly after sunrise. Philippe Nasser and the number 4 Porsche Penske had an off into the tire barrier and dumped. Um, the number 81 because it was it's worth noting that granted we talked about it when we talked about the Le Mans entry list. But as opposed to Corvette Racing proper, it was actually TF Sport that operated the Corvettes this year. And well, they were dog slow anyway, so there's that. Um, and number 2 is the number 81 Corvette broke. So what else is new? The number 77 Aston Martin, 'cause that's the Heart of Racing car, had a massive shunt heading into Indianapolis, not too dissimilar from the Porsche Penske, which resulted in a safety car. Say it with me, everybody. Um, and then the number 93 Peugeot bended into the tire barrier and the gravel trap under a safety car period. Apparently, it was a wet spot of the circuit, but given the fact that safety car speed is like 80 kilometers an hour in most parts of the circuit, that still is impressive to
Yeah,
lose it.
it just looked especially like kind of weird and clumsy considering the fact that nobody else crashed there except for the Peugeot.
Yeah.
It's like there was an LMP2, I think, that was in front of them that kind of like wiggled a little bit, but they kept going, and then Peugeot just like straight up bends it, and I'm like, okay, I mean, and then that's what they said. Allegedly, there was a wet spot. Now, do I believe them or not? Probably not. I mean, again, because nobody else had any issues. So I feel like they kind of just been covering for their driver having, a lapse in talent, unfortunately. But
Yeah, and that's probably more accurate. Yeah, it was a very silly accident. um the number 3 Cadillac broke and was basically retired because it was just puking oil. Um, and then Indianapolis just clearly was not done because the Action Express Cadillac hit the barriers in that spot and was done after that.
I mean, it didn't DNF, but like it had significant damage they had to
Yeah,
repair, and it was like, I don't know, probably a few laps down.
yeah, yeah. It was basically at this stage of the race, it was too late to gonna be able to really make that up. unless misery befell the rest of the hypercar field. Um, then the number 95 McLaren broke and caused a full course yellow, which means that both McLarens broke. Um, then the number 83 Ferrari, the hybrid drive unit failed, which, well, given that the hypercars are, well, hybrid, it's kind of important to have the hybrid bits working, and it just, well, didn't. Um, then the number 6 Porsche Penske of Kevin Estre, um, and Pierre Guidi um, had coming together for fourth place. Um, and then, arguably, the funniest thing to fail with the Iron Dames Lamborghini and the 87 Akotis Lexus, the Lexus had the hood part, well, it flew up. The hood pins on the front broke while battling the Lexus, which was very funny. But
I mean, to their credit, Lexus actually didn't do too bad this race. I mean, I thought they weren't gonna make it through the whole race, but they
I
actually
didn't
didn't do
either.
bad. I thought they were gonna break halfway through.
Yeah, no, the this has arguably been the best showing for the Lexus yet this year. So I'm certainly not upset with how they did, but definitely the hood popping up was very funny and very much a reminder of issues that have befallen the Lexus so far this year. Uh, but with around 2 hours left, we had some pit lane chaos. The number 8 Toyota pit, but the wheel gun doesn't engage, which shades of Sauber with that one. And so it was a slow stop, and they lost a boatload of time. Um, then the number 50 Ferrari had an unsafe release, although it wasn't penalized for it. And to be fair, there was lots of chatter about how lenient, or I guess disinterested race control seemed to be at this point in the race. Which, granted, I should point out that it's not uncommon, particularly at Le Mans. I've noticed in the past for race control to make note of incidents, but deem them no further action, even when that goes against the precedent set even just earlier in the race, for that matter. It seems like even race control gets, well, frankly, it seems like even they're tired. And I mean, at least I know the way in theory it works is that they should have kind of a rolling cast and crew all 24 hours. So that way nobody's up for the full time. But certainly race control acts like they've been awake for 24 hours straight, I guess is my point.
I mean, they just couldn't be asked, honestly. And then there was
That's,
another incident later where they were like, okay, the Toyota got hit. The number 8 had it coming together with the number 51 Ferrari. And race control just decided that they were going to investigate that incident 40 minutes later after it had already happened.
yeah, which, like I said, we've seen this before. Maybe, I feel like we've talked about it a lot on this show, and I guess that's because we have. But there's certainly the way stewarding works. There should probably be our race control. Sorry, because those are two very different things. It should be shifted, modified, revised, etc. Um, as such, so that way this kind of stuff doesn't happen as frequently as it does, because it feels like there's at least one race control controversy like per race at this point, and it's kind of frustrating. Um, but at any rate, we would have rain one more time during this race. Um, the and then, yes, the 8 got mullered by the 51 Ferrari. The 50 Ferrari had door issues like the number 99 Porsche did. Um, the number 50 Ferrari also was under investigation for a pit stop infringement. Nothing happened. And also, that particular Ferrari and track limits, just what was that, apparently? Because it's just like when you get bored and start making up lines and like racing sims, and that's basically what the number 50 was doing.
I mean,
Um,
them and like there were like some LMP2s that were also doing the same thing towards the end when they were like racing, like actually like legit like fighting for position. Like they were just like they just said fuck track limits. I mean, track limits, what track limits? I don't know what that is. I mean, they were just all over the whole place and running on parts of the track that I know probably would not have probably wouldn't have gotten by with race control if it were towards the beginning of the race. I mean, I know it didn't because plenty of people got, slapped with warnings and stuff for
mhm.
track limits towards the beginning of the race, but at the end of the race, they just didn't care.
No, by the end of the race, they just don't care. They're ready to get this done with and go home. Um, but the number 20 BMW would emerge from its slumber in the garage and basically at the very end of the race to cross the finish line. But I mean, it was so far behind that the car wasn't actually classified. So it was more a
No, because
moral.
they didn't complete, I think, like the minimum, like 70% of like the race or something to be classified. So it was like, it was all for nothing. Really, they should have just said that they were retiring the car way early on. They kind of just did all this for nothing.
Agreed. Yeah, there wasn't really much functional, maybe other than, I guess, morally. Maybe this helps somebody somewhere feel better, but in terms of anything that actually matters, it was whatever. But at any rate, the number 50 Ferrari would win overall in hypercar. Um, then the number 22 United Autosports LMP2 would take class win. The number 91 Manthey Racing Porsche, um, which, like Thanos, has felt kind of inevitable. These last handful of events would win in LMGT3. Um, And then basically the only BMW to be left in the race, the number 31, would actually end up finishing on the podium, which is, well, truth be told, given the omnishambles that BMW perpetually seems to be in, is, well, about as much as you could hope for, I think. So, so yeah, overall, it was a very, very eventful Le Mans this year.
And it's funny because BMW came into Le Mans with four cars and only one came out with only one on the other end.
yes, yeah, because I know that, within BMW M, there's, basically, you've got the road cars, you've got the racing. I would love to be a fly on the wall for these meetings after these events where it's like all of the cars break for some reason. And then you have to explain why this has happened, where, again, four cars campaigned and, one or two of them finish. Um, but,
I mean, at least I mean they weren't Alpine, even though I don't know. They probably weren't any better than Alpine. Alpine and then there was a video of like the whole like garage like clapping after the second car DNF. Like I just couldn't believe it. I'm just like, what is happening? What is this sport?
yeah. Yeah, as endurance racing is very unserious, and of course, that mean that in like the best way possible. Um, it's very funny, yes, to see this kind of stuff. Yeah, but the mechanics are mostly happy because they know that the car will be retired and they don't have to fix it. Um,
And then they were like, and then the Alpine made like a statement. They're like, we're gonna continue to investigate these issues. Like the issues is the freaking Mechachrome engines are terrible. They're shit. That's the problem.
yeah, that's really what it boils down to. Is that, yeah, just the power units are just garbage. So there's not. I mean, I guess you can maybe want to investigate the cause of the failure, but I'm like, other than that, there's really not much to have a look at. So, yeah, I don't know, but But yeah, so no, it was an eventful Le Mans. Lots of incidences, lots of rain, which again always spices up this race. But generally, other than 4 hours behind the safety car, broadly speaking, pretty fun. So 10 out of, well, no, actually not 10 out of 10 because we had 4 hours behind safety car. 8 out of 10 would do it again. Um, but yeah, that has been the big Le Mans episode and recap. Thank you so much for joining us. We are your hosts, Danny and JT, and this has been another episode of Chicanery. Until next time, everyone.
What's going on, everybody? It's your apparently least favorite podcast host. Yeah, I'm a little salty about that poll. Come here to talk to you guys about something real quick. Now, I know I wasn't on this episode, and I know I haven't been on any recent episodes, but I can't help it. I've been crisscrossing the nation, exploring every barbecue joint and subsequently bathroom from Houston all the way to Miami. But, be that as it may, we still have work to do outside of our regular jobs, right? So we're less than a month out from going back to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the oval configuration. So excited about it. What else? What does that have in common with anything else? What are you talking about, Carl? Why are you mentioning this race? Well, that's because our great friends at Home Field Apparel are, of course, based out of Indianapolis. And if you haven't heard me talk about them before, you're in for a treat. Home Field Apparel is a vintage collegiate apparel company. They've done designs for over 80 collegiate programs. They also this year got into making vintage motorsports apparel. They've had some awesome collections: the Hendrick Motorsports, the Indy 500 collection, the Aero McLaren collection. All fantastic shirts, fantastic products. It is blistering hot in at least 50% of the country right now, probably more. And I'm telling you something, there is nothing better to cool you off on a hot day like a quality-made Home Field shirt. Those other places, those shirts are heavy wool. They're made for guys in Siberia. You're gonna burn, roast alive one of those things. You get you a nice, cool, crisp Home Field shirt. Don't shrink in the wash. Don't hold me to that. I don't want us to get sued, but they usually don't shrink in the wash. Great quality at a great price on top of that. And they're easy to get to. Homefieldapparel.com. They've even got an app. It works wonderful. And then while you're at it, use our code VLV24 for 15% off your first order. Like I said, go and check out the merchandise. They've got some great collections, some great hats. I mean, just everything about them. Mwah, wonderful. Anyway, again, that's code VLV24 at homefieldapparel.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Chicanery. I am your host, Danny, and we have JT.
Hello again.
And we are here with the 24 Hours of Nürburgring, which in and of itself is something of a misnomer. We'll get to that. In what feels like a last couple of weeks of absolutely just balmy racing, we've got another one. And so I guess we should probably get into it. So, of course, news cycle things. It feels like an episode these days wouldn't be complete if we didn't cover that stuff before we get to the actual main feature. So, starting off, to the surprise of literally nobody, the effectively competitor to NLS, NES, Nürburgring Endurance Series, has been canceled. Like I said, I don't know of a single person who pays even tangential attention that couldn't have seen this coming. The season got off to a rough start. Well, it didn't even start technically. And then events that were meant to be contested later just didn't. This just never worked. This was an odd moment of trying to wrestle control away, basically. and it's failed spectacularly. Um, then moving on to some other news, BMW revealed their customary art car livery that they do for Le Mans every year. Um, so this is they revealed one for the prototype, um, and honestly, kind of neat. I still don't think anything tops art the couple of different art cars that were run on the E92 GT2s from way back when, but this is still very, very neat. Um, but at the same time, BMW revealed the both the GT3 and then later the GT4 Evos. They're effectively based off of the LCI or life cycle impulse. If for those who don't speak BMW, um, G82 M4s. And so the whole idea is that they're meant to be a bit more accessible, a bit easier to drive. That was the big thing that BMW really stressed with in the press junkets with these updates. So we won't see these cars run for a little bit, but in theory, well, they should be quicker um, when they do. And perhaps we'll have to reach out to friend of the pod, Samantha Tan, to get her thoughts and feelings when she gets her hands on one, inevitably. But at any rate, moving on, the Next Gen Cup series has made its triumphant return. Um, but initially, it was announced that they would be joining Formula E as a support series at a handful of races, like Misano and Berlin, and the season finale at London. Misano was actually initially supposed to be the debut race for this, but that didn't work. Shortly before the Misano weekend, Formula E had actually announced that the races had been canceled for season 10, and this was back in April, thereabouts. Um, However, as of mid-May, the series announced that they would still run this year, but with a modified schedule. They were joining DTM instead. And the first weekend is supposed to be basically 4th of July weekend at the Norris Ring, which is curious. Um, and I guess that's actually a bit of an aside for those wondering why we have paid exactly bugger all attention to Formula E this season and we didn't last year. It's because the new cars kind of suck, and it's also kind of a pain in the butt to watch. So JT and I have collectively decided that we are not going to bother. uh, but um, but moving on to Nürburgring qualifying. Um, so the number 72 BMW would be on pole for the race start, but then pardon me, a curious but unfortunate thing happened. So one Mr. Steve Brown, you probably know him better as Super GT. Or though then again, maybe not at this point, given the way his profile is really raised with real life motorsports. But anyway, he shares an M4 GT4 Bilstein sponsored car with Misha Sharudin, um, um, Jimmy Broadbent, and I can't remember who the other driver in their lineup is. Um, but he was disqualified from the 24 hours of Nürburgring and has actually been stripped of his Nordschleife license. So it was a code 60 zone, which is 60 kilometers an hour. Basically, it's a slow zone. And he was clocked at 144 kilometers an hour. So more than twice the imposed speed limit, which is needless to say, that is a massive infraction. Especially given that Nordschleife is very narrow in spots, visibility can be challenging at the best of times, given that there are lots of blind corners. there are reasons why those Code 60 zones are in place. And, well, needless to say, this was a massive, massive contravention of such. To be fair, Steve owned up to it on Twitter basically immediately, and apologized profusely. Um, it seems like it wasn't intentional, but it does represent a huge safety issue. And I understand why race control took such a dim view of this. It makes perfect sense. Um, but moving on to sort of the race, I said at the top of the show that this was that calling this the 24 hours of Nurburgring was something of a misnomer, and that is because for the third time this year we have had some like marquee endurance race that has been completely turned on its head time wise. Initially, you had Spa, or I'm sorry, rewind. I've completely goofed that. You had the Daytona 24, which was not quite 24 hours. It was like 23:50 odd. Then you had Spa, which because of a stoppage due to a Cadillac being written off, ended up being basically extended by about an hour. And now you have the 24 hours of Nürburgring. Um, that was, well, should be 24 hours in basically any other context, effectively being only about 9, which is very funny. Um, but yeah, it's like the old Doofenshmirtz quotes where, if the XYZ happened, I have had a nickel for every time XYZ thing happened. I would only have 2 nickels, but it's weird that it happened twice. This is a case of, I guess I'd have 3 nickels, but it's really bloody weird that this has happened 3 times where you've had some kind of time-related shenanigans. So, in a like I said, in a marquee, endurance race, Daytona, Spa, and now Nürburgring.
I mean, next thing you know, Le Mans is gonna be like 12 hours or something.
Well, that would be really funny. I might actually be kinda grumpy about that one because Le Mans, I adore Le Mans. But yeah, that could be kinda funny. But at any rate, getting into the actual race itself, there were some kind of fun battles, for position, the number 911, funny, Manthey Porsche and the 99, row BMW were scrapping, quite a bit. In fact, to the point where it looked like the battle for the overall victory was probably gonna end up being between those 2 cars. But well, we'll get to that. Um, but then we had a couple GT3 cars that were trying to go like 3 and 4 wide through parts of the circuit, and then an Audi moves to try to block Mercedes, and basically a kind of bit of a concertina ensues. The Audi gets into the Mercedes, which gets into the Porsche, which then sends the Porsche spinning across the track. Then you had a couple of back markers from another class that got into a massive accident and ended up in the tire barriers. But at any rate, that wonderful battle that we were talking about earlier, that was, oh so great and so fabulous, and oh, this will be for the win. Yeah, well, the bloody BMW crashed. It was Sheldon Vanderlyn at the wheel, and he binned it while leading. And he was attempting to navigate back markers and didn't do very well. It was yeah, it was one of the low class like estate cars. I don't actually remember exactly what it was. But it was yeah, it just got obliterated by the spinning BMW, which is such a shame. And it's weird because there's like part of what makes trying to figure out what happened here so odd is because you effectively only have one view of the crash. Because apparently it's just at a part of the circuit where there must not be much in the way of like the broadcast cameras. Um, so you only have the onboard, but the issue with the onboard is that because it's currently in the middle of a shunt, the footage isn't very good. So it's very odd,
I
but
mean, it seems like nobody knew exactly even what happened. Like, I mean, I watched it like several times and I'm like, I still don't know what happened. I don't even know what cars were involved. I mean, I could somehow like piece together a little bit of what happened just because like of what people are saying. Like, I think it was like a Porsche Cayman or something that got in contact with like the BMW somehow.
yeah, I was just about
And
to say
then it was like,
that's about all that was visible. You had a Cayman GT4 Club Sport that got into the BMW, and that's about all we know.
and then I don't know what the little car was that the BMW annihilated was either.
Yeah, I don't either. Like I said, I looked at it, and I'm usually pretty good at spotting out even funky, like European only market stuff. I'll have to go back and rewatch it and see if maybe I can figure it out. But
Like somebody
certainly,
said it was like a BMW like station wagon or something, and then I'm like, it kind of looked like a Volkswagen. Like I'm like, I have no idea what it is.
yeah, yeah, I don't either. Um, but um, but yeah, I mean, so for what it's worth, the number 99 was recoverable, fixable, etc. But I mean, needless to say, it was out of contention for the win. And then the rain arrived. So, first of all, Mantai, who is usually pretty peerless when it comes to strategy related things, completely botched this one. Um, Mantai, they didn't change to wet weather tires, despite the fact that it was very obviously, wet. um,
They basically pulled. If you watched like the WEC race at Imola, they basically pulled an AF Corsa, but kind of worse because like the circuit was actually legitimately wet, and they actually needed to switch to wet tires, but they didn't for whatever reason. I don't know.
yeah, it was so strange. And then they put themselves at a significant disadvantage, pardon me, as a result, and they ended up getting passed for P4 by the Abt Lamborghini of Kelvin Vanderlyn. Um, and then we get to about hour 15, and the race is brought to a grinding halt because of some of the craziest fog I think I've ever seen at the Nordschleife and reduced visibility. Um, the race was red flagged for basically the entirety of the night. Well, not that most of the night, not entirely, but and there were basically no updates from race control until the morning hours. Which the fog was still there, granted, with the just a bit of the convection heating that the sun does. A little bit of it had burned off, but conditions had not improved enough, at least not for race control's liking, to get back going. Um, the race eventually did get green flagged. Race control said that there would basically be 5 laps done behind safety car, and then a decision would be made whether or not the race would be continued. Um, but the fog just wasn't lifting. Um, and so it was decided that the race would be ended early. Um, so out of the full 24 hours, only about just shy of 9, I think, technically, were actually completed. The number 16 Scherer Sport PHX Audi would win overall, but it wasn't eligible for points. So it was actually the Montai, the number 911 Montai, that ended up winning, or ended up getting the points haul, I guess more accurately. And then it's wild because this race also Volkswagen was showing off the updated Golf Club Sport, and so I think they even had the updated TCR car at the circuit, I think, and they posted some photos of on their socials in the fog. It was crazy how dense it was around the circuit. Like some of those shots were, especially were still a little overcast. It almost looks like, even though this was during the daylight hours, where there was a little overcast, it almost looks like it's in the middle of the evening. It is nuts, just how dense the fog was.
I mean, it looked like Silent Hill, basically. I mean,
Yeah,
it
it
makes sense
really
why
did.
the circuit's called like Green Hell. I mean, it definitely looked like hell.
Yes, well, if that is the case, then Roe was knocking on Satan's door and was very angry. Um, because they protested the decision that the stewards made about the way they ended up winning the race. Mind you, Roe wasn't winning this thing anyway, um, but they were pissed about it. But they argued that the rules were not properly applied. Um, and then the argument was that at the end of basically the sighting laps, the 5 laps, um, which was at a little after 3 o'clock in the afternoon local time, that the race should have been interrupted a second time rather than finished. Um, but they said that at 7:30 a.m. Or which is actually 1:30. Well, 7:30 here. That's 1:30 in Germany. 1:30 p.m. in Germany. Sorry. Cars went out back on track to do exploratory laps behind the safety cars. Stewards decided to call the race. Apparently, this was 55 minutes earlier than was supposed to. And that basically, if the race was declared interrupted rather than complete, then some of the time penalties uh, that had been applied elsewhere within the field, basically the teams would have to serve that, and then basically it would have moved the BMW in question here up the order. And then this is where of particularly the sporting regulations. In this instance, this is Article 35, Section 3, and that is the minimum pit stop times applicable at the time of the classification, including any time penalties and stop go time penalties, will subsequently be added to the vehicle's total driving time in the form of a penalty. And basically, after Rowe lodged the penalty, everybody was like, okay, this is just a bunch of nonsense because you guys bend it from the lead and you're trying to move up the order a little bit. Rowe was like, no, 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 we promise it's not. No, absolutely not. Which I personally don't believe them at all. I think they are completely full of garbage, and this is just a bunch of postulating to move themselves higher up the order. The protest was rejected by the stewards, who were saying, protest is admissible but not justified. And in the view of the stewards, this wording is not correct. The race was finished at this time, which is basically shut up and go home, is effectively what the stewards are saying in this instance. However, Rowe is seeking to appeal this decision. So it's funny, I was hyped for the Nürburgring 24. I actually had a good friend of mine that went to the Nürburgring 24. And I was like, okay, this will be a good time. Lots of racing, extended highlights. And then basically every time I checked in on the race, fog was basically the word of the day. And yeah, it just never cleared up. So that's
I mean, I
kind of
was
why.
super disappointed, honestly, because it seemed like every time I checked in on the race, like I checked in on it and it was like, okay, it was somebody crashed. And then I checked in on it again, and then the BMW crashed. And I was like, at that point, I considered not even watching the rest of it. And then it's like, I check in again, and it's like Monty screwed up the pit stop. They screwed up with their friggin' tires. And I'm like, I was just not having a good time this weekend. Okay, it was not great for me. I mean, I was
Yeah.
very disappointed. Hopefully, Le Mans will be a little bit better. I mean, I don't know, but hopefully, because I'm very disappointed. It's funny because I mean, there was more racing that happened in the season opener at Qatar with WEC than there was in this whole entire race.
Yes, that's absolutely correct, and that's not really the way that it should be. Yeah, it was a bummer because I had stuff to do, so I didn't get the chance to really watch Nürburgring like I usually do. Um, but yeah, no, like you said, it was the BMW crashed, the Porsche goofed, Monty goofed up strategy, and then fog. Well, rain, then fog, and it just frankly, it turned this race into kind of a bummer. If I'm being perfectly honest.
I
I
mean,
mean,
the only good thing about it was that nobody annihilated the Dacia again. It survived, I think.
yeah, which I mean, that's certainly worth something, but that was because there wasn't enough race run for the Dacia to even have the chance of getting annihilated. So that's kind of the flip side to that. But um, but yeah, like I said, unfortunately, because the Nürburgring 24 was very much not 24, so 24 hours, it was only about 9. And like I said, a lot of that was, just fog and sighting laps. So not really a whole lot to report from the Nordschleife of this year. Um, so I guess with that little mini-sode, I guess a bit of an sort of future look on sort of what's coming on the pod. So of course we've got Montreal. Formula One is back with Montreal. We've got Road America for IndyCar. Um, we do have Le Mans coming up here very, very soon. Super excited for that. Um, and those are kind of the big events. And don't worry, I did not forget about Monaco. Outside of the first lap, nothing happened. And it wasn't enough. I recorded a Monaco episode about 4 different times, and none of them were long enough to justify putting out. So that will be bundled into an episode with Montreal next week at some point. We'll have to see because it's very busy. Because, the month of June is very busy when you're a queer coffee shop. It means you're going to all of the Pride events. So I have lots of those to do. But yeah, I guess with that, that's kind of the Nürburgring 9 and sort of outlook on some future content. With that, uh, thank you everyone so much for listening. We have been your hosts, Danny and JT. And until next time, everyone.